Hi, this is David Panush of the Edmund Burke School, and this is a video lecture for Stumbling on Happiness by Dan Gilbert. This is Chapter 5, Realism, Part 2. So as you may recall, in the previous chapter, Gilbert talked about how we rely on our imagination to make decisions about the future. So just a quick recap, if I want to decide whether or not to go out with my friends to a movie or stay in and play games with my wife, I try to imagine what each of those options would feel like and which one I would like better, and then I make a choice. And in the last chapter, we talked about how the imagination fills in a lot of information to give you a false detail of each option, but actually a lot of the stuff that it fills in isn't accurate. Similarly, when our imagination goes to construct these two possibilities or any two possibilities, it leaves out a lot of information that is really important. And again, just like in the filling in mistake, with the leaving out mistake, we're not aware that our brains are doing it. So Gilbert begins by talking about this experiment, which is really just a means of reinforcing this idea that generally speaking, our brains are really bad, even if we're not talking about imagination, at paying attention to what is not there. So easy for me to pay attention to the sound. Roar! Ooh, better pay attention. Or the bright light. Ooh, better pay attention, right? But if there was a bunch of sound and maybe the sound dies out and all of a sudden it's silent, I don't notice, right? I don't pay attention and say, why are there no sounds? That could be an important piece of information. Maybe it's the right before the predator attacks, all the sounds go quiet, and I'm not paying attention to the lack of sound, and I get eaten, right? So we're just not very good at paying attention to what's not there. So experimenters did an experiment to demonstrate this, where they showed people a set of letters in groups of 3, and they pointed to one of those sets, this highlighted in orange, and they said, what makes this one special? And then they would show them another set and say, what makes this one special? And the idea was, it was the same thing that made the special in all the iterations or each time. And you had to, like, how many times would I need to show you all the sets before you grasp the pattern? So in the first example above, what sets the fourth one apart is that it is the only one with the letter T. And people pretty quickly grasp that, 34 sets, which actually still maybe seems like a lot because you know, well, maybe because you have hindsight, because you know. But so over time, people are able to see, oh, it's the only one with that letter. That's what sets it apart. In the second version, they did the same experiment. What's the pattern? Oh, let's show you another one. Look at the special one. What's the pattern? You know, and each time in this one, they never got it. And what made the one in orange, or the one highlighted, or the one they pointed to, special was the fact that it did not have a letter T, and all the other ones did. And in fact, people just couldn't figure out the pattern. So we're not really good at finding patterns or anything about that have to do with the absence of something as opposed to the occurrence of something. Similarly, Gilbert talks about this idea of thinking about, well, what are the causal relationships between two things that happen? And again, we're just not very good at thinking about or estimating when neither of those things happen, or even when one of them doesn't happen, we're not very good at. So if you're talking about lung cancer, right, a co-occurrence is all the times that people who smoke have lung cancer. A non-co-occurrence is all the times that somebody smokes but doesn't have lung cancer, or somebody has lung cancer but doesn't smoke. And that tells you something about the relationship between the two variables. But you also need to consider all the times people who don't smoke don't have lung cancer, because that's an important piece of information in trying to figure it out. But we don't generally do that sort of thing when we try to figure out what causes what or what's connected to what. You know, and he gives the example of a pigeon's pooping on your head, or on your, you know, poop lands on you, and you think, oh man, pigeons always poop on me. Well, let's think about some non-co-occurrences. How many times do pigeons poop and it doesn't land on you? That's probably pretty often. How often are you outside and don't get pooped on? Pretty often. But even more is the times where you are not outside and pigeons are not pooping. So underestimating those absences leads us to believe that something happens a lot more frequently than it does, which is the poop falls on us. It really doesn't happen that often at all. So that's the problem with the way we imagine the future, is that we just leave out really important things. and it matters, right? So in a series of experiments that Gilbert describes, where people are asked to imagine certain things or make choices about certain things, they imagine it wrong because they leave out a lot of important details. And sometimes those details are more of like the mundane, right? The things that don't catch your attention. The fact that you're just going to go about your day the normal way, or the fact that, like, the weather is the weather, or that, life goes on. Like, you don't think about those things when you're making these choices of imagination. And so it's worth looking at all the specific examples that Gilbert gives to understand how we make some rational assumptions based on what we don't imagine, what we don't guess. Finally, Gilbert talks a little bit about how not only does this mess us up in terms of any choices we make, but it makes it even more perplexing when we think about choices that are further on into the future. So today we can imagine very vividly because we're in it, and I can imagine like right now or 5 minutes from now pretty vividly. Tomorrow I can kind of get my head around, but next year is pretty vague and hazy. So what that causes is a bias where I actually value now and tomorrow much more than I would value next year. And the example of this that he gives is, generally speaking, if you ask somebody, do you want $19 right now or $20 tomorrow? Most people just take the 19 bucks because it's very vivid for them to imagine waiting right now an entire day. Seems like a long time to wait for $1, and it's only $1. So give me my $19 right now. I value that. But if you gave people the same exact option 364 days from now or 365 days from now and said, would you want $19 364 days from now or $20 365 days from now? People easily make the more rational choice and say, well, let's take the 20 bucks. What's another day? I've waited 364 days already. And it all, seems very far off in a hazy future. So it can cause some irrational decision making, which, especially when it comes to money, should make you think also a little bit about some of the maybe ways in which traditional economics gets it wrong. And you could make some connections to Predictably Irrational if you're reading that book or talking about it in class also. So there you have it. We use our imagination to weigh events and options in our future. The problem is our imagination leaves out tons of really important information that's going to affect those futures, and we don't know it. And so again, we're making a choice based on faulty information. See you next time.